This is The Express with Gary Allen, your 360-degree view of the world. Now, here's your host, Gary Allen.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Express. Gary Allen with you. Hope everybody's having a great night. It's the opening of the NBA season. I'm happy my Celtics are ahead. One game doesn't make a whole season, but it's nice to see the NBA back. But anyway, I hope everybody's had a wonderful time since the last time we spoke. Loretta Swit said she thoroughly enjoyed the show. I spoke to her afterwards. And tonight we have equally an amazing guest to join us. Excuse me. As you know, I fight colds from time to time. Tonight we have an interesting guest on. His name is Doug Hershey, and he's written this wonderful book. And it's a pictorial book as well called Israel Rising. It's the 70th anniversary of the nation of Israel from 1948 to 2018. But for those of you that are biblical scholars, you'll realize that Israel's been around a lot longer than that. Not under the name of Israel. It was known for many, many years either as Judea or Palestine. And I just want to read this quick thing here before I introduce Doug to you. This comes from the very first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. In Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. And if you know anything about how long it took, the struggles that Israel has gone through, you'll understand what that means. Now, also, before I introduce David, I just want all of you to know that Israel is just not occupied by people who are Jewish. It's occupied by Christians. It's occupied by Muslims and many other faiths. For as small a country as it is, it's probably one of the most important historical countries in the world. There are many countries that are historically important, but Israel, biblically and historically, are extremely important. If you're Christian or Jewish, this is where it all began. This is where faith started to emerge as we know it today. For Christians, it is the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and it is also the place of crucifixion and resurrection. For Jews, it is a state that they wanted badly, their own country. They wanted it because it said, we are a people, we are to be counted. For those of you that are not familiar with Israel and what has gone on over the years, since 59-7 BCE, Israel has been ruled by the Greeks, the Romans, before and under Herod, the Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, multiple Muslim and Arab rules. The Crusaders ruled, the Ottoman Empire and British Mandate, and many, many others. It is a very small country, probably no larger than Connecticut and Rhode Island put together, but it serves as one of the most important countries in the world. It is the beginning and the end. It is where Christ was born, and it is where the end will occur in a little town called Megiddo, as most of you know in the Bible, Armageddon. With that said, we are going to talk about that and this beautiful book and the travels of this young man that I just had the pleasure to meet. We've become fast friends. His name is Doug Hershey. He's the author, conference speaker, and founder of Ezariah Adventures, an Israeli-focused travel and education company. For years of his hands-on experience cultivating local relationships in Israel and love for its history, Doug provides a unique perspective on Jewish scripture and presents a day in Israel. Based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a place I know kind of well, where he is not, when he is not in Israel with his group, he is speaking to churches and synagogues all over the world. He's currently on a book tour, and we're so pleased to have him join us tonight. He is the author of Israeli Rising. This is a book you need to get if you're a historian or you enjoy biblical history. The photographs in there are fabulous from the 1800s up until today. So with that said, Doug Hershey, thank you for joining us tonight here on The Express. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to talking with you guys.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. Tell us about the photographer that did most of the photography in the book.
Elise Terrio, she's out of Chico, California, a phenomenal photographer. I had chosen her with the project just simply because she had actually been on one of my trips to Israel prior, and I've seen lots of photos of Israel, and she was just capturing angles that I hadn't really seen before. And anybody who just opens the book and flips through some of her work, it's really, really phenomenal. So I was happy to have her on board.
Yeah, the photography is extraordinary, and I would imagine for you and her to work together, you had to be both on the same page. It's extraordinary to visually see this. Photographs. What Doug has done, he's taken photographs from the 1800s and showed you what Israel looks like now, or in 1948, the landscape, how it's changed, what's happened to it. It's absolutely fantastic. You can get it at Amazon. You can find it just about everywhere you can. We'll talk about that as we move forward. But what was the idea behind what finally you said, I've got to put this book together?
It was just sort of I never really had a divine revelation of sorts. It was something I had been going back and forth to Israel, and as I'm taking my groups down the Jordan Valley, one of my favorite drives between the Sea of Galilee and down to the Dead Sea, is you're constantly, anytime you go down to the Dead Sea, you're driving downhill. But it's like, I kept saying to my group, around this corner, like the landscape will really change from green and plush, fertile farmland in the northern Galilee down to just sort of desert, empty, barren, dusty, rocky hillsides, and it wasn't happening. Like I kept turning the corner and going, oh, well, maybe I had it wrong. And then soon I realized, these orchards over here, they didn't used to be here, and that date farm, that didn't used to be there. And I realized like much of this valley was just being replanted and resettled. And then just in my own time, just reading through the Bible, and Ezekiel 36, there's this old prophecy in the Bible where it talks about, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but basically just says that when the Jewish people are out of the land will be forgotten and desolate and empty, and no one will inhabit it. When the Jewish people return and the land again becomes their possession, that the branches will put forth fruit, and the land will be cultivated and sown. Basically just talks about the land physically responding to Jewish sovereignty. And so that kind of began this whole journey. And I began, checking out some of these old photos and going, I wonder if this has ever happened before. And so, started finding these old photos between the 1880s and the 1940s. And so much has changed in such a short amount of time. When you look at these old black and white photos, I felt like I was just sort of looking into a different world in a way. Yeah. But they're really only about 100 years old.
Yeah, and by the way, that prophecy is 2,600 years old. So I mean, it was quite interesting. I remember I was about 12, 13 years old when the first time I went to Israel. I had the opportunity to go because members of my family worked in the airline industry. And I'll be honest with you, at 12 or 13 years old, I really wasn't a biblical scholar, but I knew enough about Bethlehem and Galilee and the Dead Sea, which, by the way, a neighbor friend went with us, and she was a very nice person, but she could not understand, no matter how we explained to her, why it was called the Dead Sea. She just didn't understand. She couldn't get it that nothing lives in the Dead Sea. But it's a beautiful place to go swimming. You can float forever. It doesn't matter who you are. But
yeah, it's hard to drown.
Yeah, I mean, an elephant can float in the Dead Sea. There's no doubt about it. But when you look at the modern conveniences of travel that we have today, we had when I was a kid, and then you think back to the times of Jesus and into the 1800s, etc. They didn't have the modern conveniences. You either rode on a camel, a donkey, maybe a cart, or you hoofed it. It brings forth emotions from you, biblically emotions coming forth when you're standing in Bethlehem or Galilee or the Dead Sea, and somebody's telling you that this is what went on here, or you go to where the Sermon of the Mount was. It really brings forth emotions, and I would imagine for you, do those emotions they're still there every time you go, are they not?
No doubt about it. I mean, I'm back and forth to Israel on a regular basis. I just got back less than a week ago from taking one of my groups. I have a travel company called Ezra Adventures, as you mentioned, and just places like the Western Wall or up in the Galilee overlooking the sea, or some of the places you mentioned. It's just I'm there all the time, and when I have a moment just to kind of sit down and suck it in, I still just go, wow, I can't believe I'm here. I mean, if anybody who's is listening has a friend or family member that went to Israel, usually the common response when they come back is it's like the Bible is like in living color. Like everything just came alive. It starts to make sense. And it does that no matter how many times you've been there.
When you're taking a group around of people that have never been to the Middle East or Israel for that matter, what are some of the things that you hear that they say? What really gets them? What hits them? What not shock? I mean, what emotionally, how does it present itself to them?
Well, shock is actually probably a pretty good word. When everybody lands in Tel Aviv, and if we start heading north up the coast, one of the first responses is, wow, I had no idea that Israel was like this. Everybody watches it on the news, or they read about it, and they're imagining sort of dusty, rocky hillsides that people are fighting over. But Tel Aviv is becoming known as the jewel of the Middle East. Any major piece of technology that we use in our lives, in our sort of day-to-day lives, anything from the cell phones components to computer components, instant messenger, GPS, the little flash drives that move information from one computer to another. I mean, it really goes on and on. And that's just in sort of computer technology. Israel has been changing the face of how the world lives and does business, and really blessing the nations. And I say all that to say, because most of that's happening in Tel Aviv. So as you're driving north, just getting out of the airport and driving north, I mean, it's like you're driving through a very booming metropolis of Middle Eastern life. And so you'll see modern malls, and you'll see signs for Apple and Sony and Intel and a lot of these Western companies that you perhaps wouldn't expect in the land of the Bible.
It's funny you say that, because I was talking to some friends of mine who have just recently returned from the Vatican, and they had never been there before. And they commented, they said how beautiful the Vatican is and how beautiful the surrounding is. And then you go about 4 or 5 blocks away from the Vatican, it's Souvenir City and Burger King and McDonald's and
right,
Kentucky
right.
Fried Chicken. And it's like, they say almost the whole thing is like your emotions collapse, And so I guess people go there thinking that they're going to see Israel and the Middle East the way that they saw it during biblical times, and of course not. I mean, things change and people grow, and modernization and everything. But what are some of the comments you hear from people too about what they're seeing as you go along on your tour?
Everything from amazement to sort of heart-stirring comments. One of the most dramatic things that's happening in Israel right now is just the amount of construction. Within Israel, there's a joke that the national bird of Israel is the crane, meaning like the construction crane, because on the skylines, there's just, every time that I'm there. I mean, I was just, like I said, in Israel last week. That was my first time in about a year, and I'm driving through parts of Tel Aviv or even up the coast going, my goodness, where do these buildings come from? But the reason that they're building is that one of the most repeated promises in the Bible is that God will return his people back to the land, and they are coming back in numbers in ways that they never have before. And so that obviously is both a benefit for an economy, also puts a strain on an economy.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jewish people are returning, the government helps them get settled into apartments and language classes, and helps them try to get assimilated into the country. But really, that's one of the most shocking things, even for me. As I'm going around, there's so much that's going on, and so when we're talking about Israel rising and looking then and now and seeing how, like this prophecy says, the waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt, It's literally happening, and it's happening at a remarkably fast rate. And everything from population booms. In the book, I've got one of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken from 1844, and the Ottoman Turks were kind enough to do a census in 1844, and they record that in Jerusalem was only 15,000 people, and over 8,000 of them were Jewish. So in 1844, the Muslim Turks are recording a Jewish majority in Jerusalem. And here we are, 150 years later, Jerusalem is booming at over 880,000 people. I mean, that kind of both growth and expansion is really stunning. And regardless of whether you've been there the first time or the second time, it's really something to behold, especially knowing some of the history of the region where barely 100 years ago there wasn't much going on.
We're talking to Doug Hershey. He's the author of the #1 bestseller on Amazon, Israel Rising. You have to get this book if you're at all a historian, or whether it be biblical history or just history in general. The pictures are absolutely fabulous, and the stories that go along with it. We're going to get into one of them in a little while. This is the story about Israel, which was established in May 14th of 1948, right up until now, 70-year anniversary and a celebration of that country's existence. Gary Allen with you here on the Express. Talk a little bit about some of the things that we discussed as far as why was it important for the country of Israel to be established. I mean, I touched on it, but I hope you can go into depth for me. Go back 1946, 47. We're only 3 years away from the war. The most horrific, devastating thing that ever happened to Europe. And it wasn't just Jews that were systematically killed, but a lot of other people. Talk about why Israel is so important to have been established, not just for the Jewish people, because they're not just Jews that are citizens of Israel. There are a lot of other people too. But talk about it, if you could, Doug.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the amazing things isn't just simply that it was established, but the reestablishment was prophesied 2,600 years ago throughout the scriptures, and that in itself makes it unique. So if we're talking about pick an ancient people group, whether it be the Romans, the Persians, the Chinese, anybody, none of them have any type of ancient prophecies or documents foretelling the destruction and desolation of their homeland, to then return as an identifiable, recognizable people that will begin changing the earth. And so, again, just that in itself, putting the Bible aside and just talking about facts of human history, there's no other people group that have been on a particular piece of land and then have been forcibly removed for 70 years, then to come back to the same piece of land, to then again be scattered for a couple thousand years without assimilating into those countries, to then return to the exact same piece of real estate as an identifiable and recognizable people, studying the same scriptures, speaking the same language as their ancestors that left a couple thousand years before. It has never happened before in human history. So aside from even just simply a safe place for Jews to live after the Holocaust, and even just modern history, just the fact that it's even there is just simply defies not only conventional wisdom, but defies just sort of natural history. Now, with the reestablishment of the nation of Israel, while it is prophesied that throughout the Bible multiple times, what's really exciting about it, or telling to me, I suppose, is that the reestablishment of the nation was not a spiritual renaissance by any shape or form. I mean, David Ben Gurion, who you quoted at the very beginning, he was for him to say that to be a realist in Israel, you need to believe in miracles. That's quite a statement from him. That was in the 1950s, after seeing all of the miracles of the War of Independence. He was a well-known sort of agnostic, atheist kind of guy. Just pull up your bootstraps and do it yourself, as were much of the nation's founders. So Israel really wasn't reestablished as a spiritual renaissance of any sort. It was established for economic purposes, for safety purposes, and just really as a place to begin, gathering, gathering the outcasts of Israel, really. And so just that in itself is just really unique in that, again, aside from it being foretold, Israel today is still very much a secular nation when it comes down to religion, although certainly there's, Jewish worship that's going on, Christian, some of the other religions, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I always thought, when you think about Israel and you think about the movie Exodus and the actual Exodus and all that went on in order for this country to become a country, I also thought it was maybe quietly, Doug, a statement by many saying, we matter. You can kill us. You can kill us. You can burn us. You can try to wipe us off the face of the earth. But we're here. We're going to still be here. We're not going anywhere. We are going to have a country of our own where our people can live in peace and harmony. Of course, that's, that kind of gets disrupted from time to time. But we matter to the world because let's be honest, even though a lot of countries were for Israel in 1948 and leading up to that, the few years for them to have their own state or own nation, there are a lot of countries, even to this day, that hate the Jewish people, hate Israel. Indeed. And I'm not just talking about Arab nations either, because there are many Arab people, as you well know, because you run into them in Israel, that they don't hate the Jews. I mean, the Iranians do and the Iraqis do and people, the governments do. But even back in the day, the British weren't all that keen on Israel becoming its own country. Oh, they didn't fight against it too much, but they weren't all that keen about it. America was. But here's this little country who's so important to the world. It's hard to describe, and I hope people will call you up and take a tour and go with you and just, God, it's such a beautiful country and beautiful people. And it's a shame that the things that go on there, that we can't find peace, which is really my next question. Do you ever see a day when there will be peace there, that there will be none of this West Bank, East Bank settlements, that finally somebody will say enough is enough? We need to get along because we're killing each other and our children.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to having a valid peace partner, and again, without sort of choosing sides so much as it is with just simple historical fact. As when we're involved with Ezra Adventures, we get involved with service projects involved in both Jewish and Arab communities, and working with Palestinian Christians in the West Bank or in Bethlehem or some of those locations as well. So I say that to say I'm not really choosing sides, but simply stating what the facts are. But since the creation of the state in 1948, the Palestinians have been offered statehood no less than 5 times, and one of the most dramatic being it during 2000 with the Camp David Accords with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat, and at that time the Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Barak was offering Yasser Arafat, I think it was 96% of all of his demands. And behind closed doors, he was saying yes. The king, one of the crown princes of Saudi Arabia, was there and told Yasser Arafat, if you don't take this deal, this will be a crime against the Arab nations. And everybody thought that was going to be the deal. And when it came down to signing the papers, he said no and went back and started one of the first intifadas where bus bombings began and killings and such. And so it continues on and on. I mean, it's difficult to make peace when you have a partner that is teaching its children to kill Jews. And with all of that said, it's not the war zone that people think that it is. There are multiple communities that I take my groups to where Jews and Arabs have work together and laugh together, and their kids play together. It's not everyone is not isolated and looking to kill each other. In fact, for most Arab Israelis, they have it better within Israel than anywhere else in the Arab world. So Arabs that are living within Israel, or even better yet, are Arab Israeli citizens. They have the highest life expectancy, the lowest infant mortality rate. They're more educated. They make more money than any other Arabs anywhere in the Middle East. Not even to mention about human rights and religious practices and freedom and such. And so when people talk about the rights for the Palestinians and what the best is for them, to me, Israel is the answer, not the problem. And because where else are they going to go to raise their family, make money, and enjoy their friends and work? I mean, it's the safest and the most prosperous place for any Arabs is within the nation of Israel, not in the surrounding 22 Arab nations, and that in itself is pretty telling.
Yeah. Before you started going to Israel, because I know your company came about, and we're going to discuss that in a little while. What were your preconceptions or notions about Israel that when you got there you went, I've been told wrong, or my thoughts are wrong, or my preconceived it's not right. My thinking there isn't right. What were some of the things that you went, it isn't that way at all?
Yeah, I think one of the most dramatic is really what we were talking about, some of the security issues. And you hear about it bits and pieces, and you hear about terrorism, and you hear about, all sorts of, things that are going on. Again, just to go and be in places where Jews and Arabs were having a good time together and laughing, and everybody was sharing cafes, and that in itself, it's, when people ask me about it and say, I would love to go to Israel, but what's the security situation? Is it okay? And every time my first response is yes, and stop watching the news. Stop watching the propaganda show on the West here, because I'm telling you, from the amount of time I spend there, the majority of it is just simply not true. It really is fake news. But Western news sources have, if everything is peaceful and wonderful and calm, then there's nothing exciting to report. And so, so that in itself is probably one of the most dramatic. Secondly, is just the whole overlay of the country. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, about the size of the country is about the size of New Jersey, and you can go snow skiing in the north, and you can go scuba diving in the south. And so, in such a small portion of land, again, about the size of New Jersey, you have coastal beaches and fertile farmland. You've got rolling hills and desert and a tropical port and snow-capped mountains in the north. And I mean, there's the topography in such a small portion of land is just really, really stunning. And so, you can drive tip to tip, north to south, the entire nation of Israel in about 7 hours if you're driving, which by U.S. standards is pretty smooth.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Yeah, if you have the chance to go out there, I mean, it's beautiful countryside. Now, my background is Greece. My parents came from Greece, but that whole region of the world is quite beautiful. And if we could just admire it for that, let's talk about some of your favorite places that you like to go to. Whether you are with a group or whether you're, just Doug traveling along. Let me just say this right off. We have Doug Hershey on the program tonight here on the Express. Gary Allen with you. Doug is the author of #1 Amazon bestseller, Israel Rising, a celebration of 70 years of the state or the country of Israel from 1948 to 2018. It's a book full of history, pictures. It is beautiful. Please go on Amazon. It's I believe it's in the bookstores like Barnes & Noble and stuff like that too. Correct, Doug?
That's right. Barnes & Noble and Books A Million across the country. You should be able to find it in a brick and mortar store as well.
I got mine for free. But
yes, you did.
Yes, I did. And I'm not the least bit ashamed to say that. I'm not the least bit ashamed to say that. But talk about your favorite parts. I know for me, it was Bethlehem. And what a lot of people don't know, and maybe I'm wrong, but there are 2 Bethlehems, correct?
Well, obviously the most popular one is the one 5 miles outside of Jerusalem, which is now under the Palestinian Authority. But that's the main the main one that would be focused on. But some of those, for me, if you're asking about things, that places I really love or really enjoy, I usually have trouble between two places. One's more well known than the other. One, I love being up in the Galilee and the Golan Heights region, when in between my groups while I'm there, or if I'm there doing some writing or something like that. You just can't beat sitting up on the ridge overlooking the Sea of Galilee. That is just simply just a stunning, beautiful place. Aside from it just being a beautiful lake and a setting with mountains, again, just having the biblical and historical aspect of just knowing that it's the north side of the Sea of Galilee is where 60 to 70% of the ministry of Jesus happened, and so that in itself is pretty special. The other one for me is probably less well known, or maybe not even known at all. It's called Mitzpe Ramon, and it's down in the middle of the Negev desert. It is the most isolated town in Israel, and if you have a copy of Israel Rising, the town started in the 1960s with construction workers building. It was like a construction worker camp, really, that building the road between Beersheba down to Eilat through the Negev desert, which is like a 3-hour drive. So Mitzpe Ramon is the most isolated town in Israel. The closest town is like 30 or 40 kilometers away, and maybe 5,000 people. But what's really stunning about it is that it's right on the edge of what's called the Ramon crater, and locals will call it like the Israeli Grand Canyon. It is just simply beautiful, beautiful. And so it's this little town, like I said, about 5,000 people, and in the photos in the books. I have an old photo of it, when it's just getting started in the 1960s, and it's dry and desolate and just sort of looks like a pretty rough camp. And now there's trees. I mean, when we talk about like the desert blooming and the towns coming to life, this is a town that literally has just blossomed in the desert. There's these amazing vineyards that are nearby. There's these olive orchards that are being replanted. But again, so I just enjoy it just for the fact of just being out in the middle of nowhere, being out in nature, and for me, one of my favorite things. I do this with groups. I take some of my groups there sometimes as well. The stargazing there is just ridiculous. I mean, there's the light pollution is so low, and I've got some of these guys that will bring out telescopes that are about as big of as big as I am, big as 5-6 foot telescopes. They're huge. And the last time, we were looking at like the rings around Saturn and the moons around Jupiter. I mean, aside from just getting this amazing stargazing opportunity, it's also the landscape of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, I've been camping and sleeping out under the stars, and waking up at like 3 a.m. and having trouble going back to sleep because the stars are just so bright. I mean, they're just screaming. So it's really one of my favorite spots to hide away.
Now, here's a question. This just came to mind as you were talking. When I was in Israel, it was summertime and spring. Now, we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ December 25th. I have never been in Israel at what we call Christmas time. They say that we do celebrate it the wrong time of the year because it's freezing cold in December.
That's right.
Okay, so it's possible that Jesus was born probably, a few months earlier than that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you talk to and which, what source you're looking at. But Jesus was Jewish, as were Mary and Joseph, and Bethlehem is just about 5 miles outside of Jerusalem, so most likely it probably would have been, around the Feast of Tabernacles time, which is early fall. Some people will say it was in the spring when about the times that the lambs were being born, which was sort of prophetic or significant of Jesus being the Lamb of God being born. But I think everybody who understands history and geography knows that in late December there's no shepherds out watching their flocks by night because it's too cold at night. Everybody's inside, so it would have been probably at a different time of year for sure.
But as I spoke earlier about Bethlehem, there is another Bethlehem Ephata, isn't it? It's a smaller town just to the east of Bethlehem itself.
Yeah. I mean, again, There is, but I mean, it's sort of pales in comparison to to the main, Bethlehem, where all the action is, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've never seen it on a map. It's always the one Bethlehem. Talk about your experiences dealing with putting together your tour company, Ezariah Adventures, how that came about, what types of groups you go, and how far in advance do you put together these different trips?
Yeah, Ezra Adventures, Ezra or Ezra in Hebrew means help. And so what we like to do, we specialize in small group travel from groups as small as 6 and as large as 12. While we do sort of larger bus trips of 30 or 40 or whatever people want to do, most of the people that are coming to us or find us are those that say, man, I've always wanted to go to Israel. I just don't want to be stuck on a bus, and I don't want to be herded around from site to site. And so when we have a group of 8 to 10 is really ideal. We travel in a small group, and it's really more of like a group of friends. The group is small enough where if we want to stop at a coffee shop, we pull up a table and pull them together. But it's really intended to have a much more personal, off the beaten path, local, get your hands dirty type of experience. And so we don't stay at hotels. We stay at guest houses, very, very comfortable guest houses that are run by organizations that are making a difference in the land. So even our lodging costs are going to support, again, ministries or organizations that are doing some really great work. And we try to come to help. Again, we get involved with whether it be building projects or having dinner with Holocaust survivors or soup kitchens, food distribution locations, even small business development with Christian Palestinian communities in Bethlehem and some other places like that. So we try to have some types of service projects that are based on the skills of the people that are coming, rather than today we're going to go paint a wall, or today we're going to do a nice good work. I want the people that are coming to really have an opportunity to give of their hearts should they choose. A second aspect of what we do as well is offering adventure day trips. Now, like I mentioned, with the topography in Israel, just providing so many different climates, we've had groups that have been snow skiing on Mount Hermon. I mean, most people don't even know you could ski in the Middle East, let alone in Israel. Snowboarding and skiing. You can do. I've been on motorcycles around the mountains of Jerusalem. Paintball, airsoft, firearms training with special forces in the desert. You can hang out with Bedouins and camels, and scuba diving and snorkeling, and hand gliding and skydiving. I mean, anything adventure. Sort of even extreme sports, mountain biking through the desert. I mean, there's just 101 really beautiful things that you can just really enjoy the land that way. And then, of course, we specialize in unique biblical sites as well, because there's 101 places that we can get a small group that a larger bus just simply can't go. And so we provide a very personal, customized and personalized experience. So when we have a group that is 6-8 people, then we get to know the people. It becomes a very relational. You have dinner with some of our friends. Ideally, we have you having dinner with a Shabbat dinner with a Jewish family, and with some Palestinian Christians in their home as well, and so we try to make it as interactive and as personable and as local, because when I hate to say it, but Israelis don't stay at hotels and they don't eat at buffets. And people that are coming, with us, they want to check out the vineyards that are popping up in Judea and Samaria, and they want to go to the best, hummus hideouts that I can show them.
Yeah.
And just enjoy some really great coffees at a coffee shop in Tel Aviv. And there's just so much to experience and to enjoy that don't fit within the normal tourism monster, I guess you could say, that's happening in Israel. And so that's what we focus on in providing, and it's a joy to really be a part of it and help people explore the land in a really different way.
Talk about some of the places that you go. For instance, you and I talked on the phone. I mentioned at the top of the program about Megiddo, which is in Bible prophecy. That's the end, or it's supposed to be, the beginning of the end. Talk about that, because that's where Armageddon is supposed to take place.
Well, it's where the word Armageddon comes from is Tel Megiddo, or and the Tel is the town of Megiddo, and it dates back all throughout Israelite history. It's a major crossroads of a couple of valleys that come together there, and what used to be in biblical times the main highway and the main staging area for some serious conflicts. And so when if you were in Egypt and you were making war with the Assyrians, you would go up that one particular valley and you'd pass by Megiddo. And so where any army in the last couple thousand years went to take Jerusalem, if they're coming from the north, they would come down the Jordan Valley or part of the Jezreel Valley, and there would be this Megiddo, and then going on down to Jericho, before Jericho being one of the lowest places on earth, before this almost a mile climb up to the mountains of where Jerusalem is at. But that was always throughout history really a staging area for armies looking to go take Jerusalem. So there's often a common misunderstanding in Christian circles that it's in that valley is where sort of the last battle is happens, but it's actually the scriptures just talk about them gathering at a place together in Hebrew, which is called Har Megiddo or Armageddon. Mm-hmm. And so it does have a place in Bible prophecy, but if you understand some of the history, it talks more about a gathering place for the armies to gather, because the battles have always been about Jerusalem and who's going to be ruling in Jerusalem, conquering and reconquering. But Megiddo is just a really fascinating place because there's 26 times it's been conquered and reconquered, and there's 26 different civilizations that have built and rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt. And so, when you're talking about biblical history, ancient history, any type of history, really, I mean, it's really all right there.
In putting this book together, what kind of research and how long did it take you to gather the pictures and, of course, get the new photography done? And this had to be more than just, a whim and a prayer. I mean, it had, a couple of years at least, just getting everything put together to go and do what you needed to do.
Yeah, beginning to end, it was about a 3-year process, and we started with 2,200 old photos. Like I said, we're taken between the 1880s and the 1940s, and then used Elise Theriault to do the photography and to come with me to the specific sites where those shots were taken, to try to shoot them from the exact same angle whenever possible. And so obviously we didn't do 2,200 locations, but in the photo book there's over 100 comparison photos of sort of then and now, and from over 25 locations all over Israel. So beginning to end of sort of my first idea to create the book to the time it was published was about a 3-year process. Lots of research, lots of study, lots of going through the old photos and choosing what locations that would work. And then for the actual photo shoot, it was about 6 weeks, and that was just, there's no other. I mean, that was just fun. I mean, that was like a treasure hunt every day. Is just getting up and trying to find the X marks the spot of where where a photographer 80 or 100, 120 years ago stacked his camera gear and got some shots. And so, so whenever possible, we tried to find those locations, and a lot of places we were right on it. It was a lot of fun.
There's some photographs that I looked at them today, the ports and things, and I went, oh, other than it being more modernized, boy, you're right there. You can see the mountains in the background, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Back in 1867, Mark Twain visited the Holy Land, and he published his impressions in The Innocent Aboard. Talk about some of the things he wrote. There's quite a nice section that you have in the book about Mark Twain's perceptions and impression of what Israel was at that time.
Yeah, as you read through portions of Innocent Abroad, when he comes into the land, I wonder if he, like many people even today, you talk about having sort of romantic ideas of what you think the land is like, and at that time there was just really nothing there. I mean, he talks about the Galilee being an unshaded lake and just very rough and barren landscape, and while he's approaching Jerusalem, he says that even the olive tree and the cactus which are fast friends of the this worthless soil. He said they've all but deserted the land. There's very little trees.
Yeah.
Everything is really desolate. And he talks about going, on some of his journeys and not seeing, going 10 miles in any direction and not seeing another sign of human life or habitation. And, one of the funnier things he says is about seeing across the way some of these sheep eating gravel. And he says, I can't imagine they're eating gravel, but there's just simply nothing else for them to eat. Like there's nothing here. And when he gets to Jerusalem, he says, I don't know how to describe how small the city is. You can walk around this entire city in about an hour. And I mean, that's how small Jerusalem was in 1867. Yeah. And, today, I mean, you can get lost in Jerusalem in 5 minutes. I mean, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
But one of the stunning things that he keeps commenting over is just how empty, how desolate, how poor, how no one is there. And basically by the ends of his travels, it's like he seems really kind of tired and exhausted and almost ready to leave, and just says something along the lines that that the region just sits in sackcloth and ashes and carries none of its former glory, and now it's just sort of it only dwells in imagination of what it used to be. And I mean, that was only I was barely 150 years ago. I mean, he probably could have never dreamed, never imagined just how quickly that change would begin from the time that he saw it till, even till 1948, there was quite a change, but it was really after 1948 that everything just, really began to just blossom in a dramatic fashion.
Have you had any of your guests on your tour or people that you vacationed with when you've been over there decided that they were going to uproot themselves from whatever country they came from and move to Israel?
Some, yes. One of the organizations we work with is called the Aliyah Return Center. And Aliyah is the term that the Israeli government uses. It's actually a biblical word talking about going up, or, going up to the land, or going up to Jerusalem, that kind of thing. And so when a Jewish person makes Aliyah, that basically means they're becoming an Israeli citizen, or you have dual citizenship if they're coming from the U.S. or wherever. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes when we have those that want to do that, we can help facilitate that through some of the organizations that we work with, and just kind of pass them on, or put them in connection with the right people. As far as just sort of the regular everyday people wanting to move there, it becomes a little bit more challenging, just simply over visa issues. I mean, you can volunteer for a couple of years, but then even after a couple of years, if you're volunteering with an organization, they say, "Thank you very much. We want you to go away for a while." And so it's they're all about tourism, coming in and come and see the land, but unless you're Jewish, that which is intended to be a Jewish state, there's a different path. Or if you have a clergy visa, you can stay longer. If you have other sort of connection, of course, work visas and that kind of thing are a little bit different. But to just say, I'm going to buy a place in Israel and retire, it's a little bit more challenging than that.
We're talking to Doug Hershey, the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Israel Rising, a celebration of 70 years of the Jewish state from 1948 from 20 to 2018. This is a wonderful book of history of this wonderful country. The pictures go back to the 1800s to 1948, and the stories and it's just if you're a student of history, you've got to get this book. You can go on Amazon, you can go to Barnes and Noble and find the book. It's an absolutely wonderful, beautiful book. He's here on the Express with us, Gary Allen, with you. Talk about some of the people that you've met along the way in Israel that you love the most. I mean, that you appreciate the most, that you have they're like a kindred spirit to you. Because when I was there, I met a number of people that I wish I had stayed in contact with. Unfortunately, I didn't. I do, if what you and I have been talking about happens, when I do go there again, I have a friend of mine who has been laid to rest there. He was a student of Kabbalah, a major student in this country. And I want to find out where he was laid to rest and pay my respects to Zev, because Zev and I went to college together, but he was also on this program a number of times. But talk about some of the people and how they embrace the people you bring, because you have a little more than just the average tourist riding around the bus.
Yeah, again, we have people that are looking to connect and are looking for that sort of relational interaction, and so, and that's part of the reason we get involved with some of the service projects as well. Isn't just simply that, okay, we're going to hear and we're doing good work or whatever the case may be, or whatever the situation. A lot of it is connecting with people that are in the land that are making the difference. So, the director of the Aliyah Return Center, it's up in the Galilee, and we brought construction teams to help renovate some of their buildings that are doing things with, it's run by a Christian organization, but they're doing things in partnership with the Jewish agency, which just that in itself is really kind of stunning and unprecedented, in that a secular Jewish government agency is working with Christians for the return of the Jewish people and helping them kind of get reacclimated and resettled. And so I enjoy being with people that are doing cool stuff, whether it be making a difference in the land or working with, Holocaust survivors. There's a couple different organizations that are working with Holocaust survivors, or what we call founders of the state, people that moved to the region in the 40s or early 50s that really helped build the country, and they're a generation that's just dying off, and at a remarkable rate. I mean, another 10 years, most of them will be gone. Yeah. And what's amazing is that we've done this multiple times with groups. I mean, we have dinner with Holocaust survivors, and they have some of the most horrific stories of, at this point they were all children during the Holocaust, but they remember it like it was yesterday. But the people themselves are some of the kindest and most affectionate and loving people. They want to talk about family, they want to dance, they want to sing, but yet they all share this, this trauma that kind of all binds them together. And so I enjoy taking my groups there, so that not only to spend time with them and to love on them and to, bless them in their later years in life, but if we're able, I want them to tell some of their stories for the generations to hear firsthand accounts of that. And that's just those types of things tend to be really impacting for our group. Not just, wow, that was really great. I'm talking like life-changing, dramatic, experiences. And those are really what makes a lot of these trips really special.
Yeah. I have a story. When I was a little boy, my mother was an interior decorator down in Miami Beach, where a lot of Jews after the Second World War moved to. They moved to the United States. And I remember one day, this woman who my mother was working for always wore a long sleeve on her dresses or blouses or whatever. And one day she reached over, and there I saw the numbers. And I didn't know what I didn't know what that was. Sure. And when I would work with my mother, I was always told to sit at the edge of the couch, shut up, and let me do my job, which was just her way of saying, be polite and don't bother the people I'm working for. Okay, fine. But I couldn't help myself. And finally, at the end, I said, Mrs. So-and-so, why do you have numbers on your wrist? And my mother said, Gary, and I said, no. She said, no, I want the child to know. We sat there for another hour and a half. My mother, patience, having coffee with this woman, telling me stories. Then years later, when I went to Poland, which is where my father's family is from, and we went to some of the concentration camps, Doug, I want to tell you, I remembered her story all the way through high school and everything. And I am telling you, the emotions that came from me and the things that I can't imagine human beings perpetrating this evil on other human beings, women and children and everything. It's just horrible. And yet the survivors, like you said, are giving and loving and caring because they've stared death in the face, and they know what it is, and they want to obliterate that hell on earth that was caused, that still goes on to some extent in this country, or in the world rather.
For sure. And that's one of the special. There were times where we'll have a group of 20 Holocaust survivors, and with our group, and our group will go out to the grocery store and we'll buy food, and we'll come back and prepare the whole thing, do a whole dinner for them. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time we were doing this, and as the dinner was coming to a close, I had asked through a translator, I said, is it could we, after dinner, could we hear some of your stories or some of your experiences? And the main sort of leader of the group kind of went, you know what? I think we just rather dance. We don't want to talk today. We want to dance. Right. And just that to me was just such a profound statement of what sort of life and victory is like, let's not dwell on the painful past. Let's enjoy the day and dance together and have fun. And that's what we did. And while some of my groups, miss the actual stories and the experiences, just the fact that they're watching, 80 and some even 90-year-old men and women smiling and dancing in the modern state of Israel, where they're safe, where, like you said, they face some of the most horrific things that a child, let alone an entire nation, could go through. Here they are just saying, let's just dance and enjoy the day and be thankful for what we have. And just that in itself is a tremendous testimony.
We've got about 5 minutes left, and we're talking to Doug Hershey, the wonderful author of this #1 Amazon bestseller, Israel Rising. Please go to Barnes & Noble, go to Amazon, and get this book. With the time we have left, Doug, if you could change one thing in Israel, what would it be?
The red tape and the bureaucracy. There's a joke when you have when you've got two Jews, you got at least 3 or 4 opinions. So it's like when you're trying to get something done and you're trying to go somewhere, you can talk to a couple different people and they'll all tell you some really positive things. And so or they'll tell you 15 different ways to do it, and then they'll be like, but you decide, and you feel like you haven't really gotten anywhere. But again, just sort of a point of humor with David Ben Gurion. One of my favorite quotes from him is he says, when if your expert tells you you can't do something, then find another expert.
Yeah.
And that is very much sort of the Israeli attitude, which is something I really enjoy. But with that comes so many different opinions, and you're not quite sure, where you can go and what you can do, and everybody's just like, well, we'll just we'll give it a shot. But sometimes it's just difficult to get sort of simple things done with the amount of sort of bureaucracy and red tape that's there. But Israel is in a unique place. They have they're one of the most immigrant absorbing countries on earth per capita. Mm-hmm. There's just nonstop building. There's some really challenges within the nation of Israel. About 20% of the population is living below the poverty line, which you wouldn't think of in Israel. Some of that, there's a couple different reasons for that, but there's definitely some profound needs. But at the same time, part of that is because these ancient biblical prophecies are coming to pass, and literally the Jewish people are returning to the land of their ancestors from the four corners of the earth. And, that creates some strain and some pressure on an economy, but it also, even just on language barriers and such, but it also creates something really profound and really beautiful that's happening in our day that we just, have never seen. And so it's sort of, a real blessing to see, and also has its sort of crazy struggles for sure.
Real quick, is there a follow-up book coming?
There's I've already, because of the success of the first one, I've been being asked for books 2 and potentially 3. So the theme of this one is ancient prophecy, Israel Rising, ancient prophecy, modern lens. The idea is that there are tons of these prophecies throughout the Bible that are coming to pass in our lifetime. Yeah. And so there'll be some more sort of then and now photos that will bring validity, or even, as we say, photographic evidence that what was prophesied 2,600 years ago is coming to pass. So can't quite let the cat out of the bag as of yet, but we're working on a couple projects, and hopefully start shooting a new photo project in early 2019.
Well, Doug Hershey, I just want to thank you so very much for coming on board the Express. Go and get this book, folks. Israel Rising. Either go to Barnes & Noble or go on Amazon. It has really been a joy, sir. I will probably give you a buzz in just a couple of minutes. But thank you so much for joining us here on the Express. I appreciate it very much. And thank all of you out there for taking the time to join us here on the Express. We'll be back next week with another program. And until then, please take care of yourselves and each other.
You've been listening to The Express with Gary Allen. Join us here every Tuesday night at 10 for more captivating talk with Gary Allen. See you next time on The Express.